On December 4th, 2024, one of the heads of United Healthcare, the largest healthcare insurance company in the world, was killed while walking in New York City. And instead of people being saddened by his death, they applauded the gunman as a hero. It seemed like the majority of people were enthralled to hear this story of a rich insurance executive dead, succumbing to the fate that he's caused so many people before him. And most of the people on the other side were composed of either wealthy individuals or centrists. They were begging us to start seeing the shooting the way they wanted it to be seen, nothing but senseless violence against someone who did not deserve it. But for most of the working class, they just saw one of their oppressors defeated. One of the most evil people on the planet was gone, and the rest of the people lording over us are now terrified. Blue Cross Blue Shield and United Healthcare both took down their executive leadership pages in response to the attack. So what makes this killing so different than any other murder? Why is this killer being celebrated as a folk hero? Every one of us Americans has a story about us or someone we know being denied coverage for a crucial healthcare procedure, or having copays so ridiculously high that they put you into bankruptcy. It's not at all uncommon in America for someone's life to be completely destroyed by a health event. It's even less uncommon to just forego going to see a doctor until your health is deteriorated to a point of no return, simply because you couldn't afford it. And then when the man who, in some part, is responsible for continuing to prop up this evil system that literally kills people, gets killed, why should we feel remorse? Because he had a family? How many families did he tear apart in pursuit of corporate greed? United Healthcare made $16 billion in profits last year, and they did so by charging people as much as possible, denying as much healthcare as possible, and paying everyone in the middle as little as possible. Legally, Brian Thompson may not have been guilty of murder, but ethically, he has his hands in an incalculable amount of death and destruction. This is why people see this as an act of retribution for their family members and their friends who are no longer alive thanks to the actions of this man. They can feel some sense of justice now that someone has harmed him the way that they've been harmed. If you're liking the video so far, go ahead and leave a like. And if you want to see more videos like this, hit the subscribe button. Thank you for watching this far in, and let's continue with the video. In Frederick Engels' 1945 book, The Condition of the Working Class in England, he introduces this term, social murder, and defines it in this passage, quote, "During my residence in England, at least 20 or 30 persons have died of simple starvation under the most revolting circumstances, and a jury has rarely been found possessed of the courage to speak the plain truth in the matter. Let the testimony of the witnesses be never so clear and unequivocal, the bourgeoisie from which the jury is selected always finds some back door through which to escape the frightful verdict, death from starvation. The bourgeoisie dare not speak the truth in these cases, for it would speak its own condemnation. But indirectly, far more than directly, many have died of starvation, where long-continued want of proper nourishment has called forth fatal illness, when it has produced such debility that causes which might otherwise have remained inoperative brought on severe illness and death. The English workingmen call this social murder, and accuse our whole society of perpetrating this crime perpetually." Engels' concept of social murder isn't one of violent crime, but rather a litany of social injustices that cause a higher mortality rate in the working class, specifically ones that would be easily avoidable save for the capitalist profit motive. Quote, "When society places hundreds of proletarians in such a position that they inevitably meet a too early and an unnatural death, one which is quite as much a death by violence as that by the sword or bullet, when it deprives thousands of the necessaries of life, places them under conditions in which they cannot live, forces them, through the strong arm of the law, to remain in such conditions until that death ensues which is the inevitable consequence, knows that these thousands of victims must perish, and yet permits these conditions to remain. Its deed is murder just as surely as the deed of the single individual, disguised malicious murder, murder against which none can defend himself, which does not seem what it is, because no man sees the murderer, because the death of the victim seems a natural one, since the offense is more of omission than of commission, but murder it remains. We all can feel this injustice happening to us. Every American agrees on the fact that our healthcare system is extremely flawed. The system that we're living under is sending us to premature graves, exactly as Engels describes. but a vast majority of Americans certainly aren't any form of revolutionary. So why are they so excited about this utilization of violence by someone against the ruling class? I think that most people can recognize that our healthcare system is this form of social murder. People can see the numerous examples of other countries with universal healthcare, where, for example, an ambulance ride won't cost them $5,000, and these are countries with much smaller GDPs than America. And then they wonder why they can't have the same for their family. This is an issue that negatively impacts every single American, and it seems like most people can recognize that. But this form of harm isn't seen as a crime as serious as others because the capitalists, the people that own the capital, are the ones committing it. This class of people operate on a different form of morality, one that is much more lenient on them than the people that they oppress. They aren't made to follow the rules like the rest of us, because they're the ones who continue to enforce this system of morality. I think this quote from Zizek sums it up pretty well. Quote, "But when one draws attention to the millions who died as the result of capitalist globalization, from the tragedy of Mexico in the 16th century to the Belgian Congo Holocaust a century ago, responsibility is largely denied. All this seems to just have happened as the result of an objective process, which nobody planned and executed, and for which there is no capitalist manifesto." No matter where your opinions lie on the debate of the morality of wage theft, wealth accumulation, or other Marxist ideas, everyone can recognize that the wealthy just aren't punished as harshly as the rest of us. And if they can prevail like this in the justice system, they're surely doing the same thing in the court of public opinion. The capitalists have a vested interest in the continuation of the oppression of workers through any means necessary. And what better way to keep them down than controlling their very ideas of morality? Think about the way our society has been taught to think of the rich: self-starters, entrepreneurs, innovators. They're made to be thought of as the most intelligent and hard-working. But does that really ring true when the richest man alive is on top of the Diablo 4 leaderboards? Our conceptions of the wealthy come from a society in which we idolize these people. How could such a biased opinion be regarded as legitimate? It's like Plato when he declares that philosophers should be the true rulers of the world. Clearly, there's a little bias involved. Just as these capitalists prevail in the justice system, they have also successfully waged a war of public opinion in their favor. They're now above the law in the eyes of many. But for Brian Thompson, his demise was at the hands of the people. When seeing this event through a Marxist perspective, the justification becomes much more obvious. The man harmed was a member of the ruling class, one of the people who continue to hurt the working class through its resource hoarding and by denying people the right to life and committing social murder behind P&L reports. This is the basic idea behind what Marxists see in all of the bourgeois. Why do you think we're so angry with these people? But it becomes so much more obvious when at the lowest points in our life, when we beg them for the medical care we are rightfully owed, we're cast aside and left to rot. A majority of Americans believe that the government should step in and provide us healthcare because our current system is just that transparently evil. End of story. And when one of the foundational members of this system is killed, everybody cheers for the guy who did the deed. But social murder goes way beyond just healthcare. It extends to climate change, to poverty, to systemic racism, to sexism, and any other social injustice. Everyone is victimized by this system that has been set up for us. The world is becoming more and more hostile to individuals everywhere, until it reaches a point of no return, where the earth is no longer able to sustain human life. If there ever was a call for change, this is it. So how do we define self-defense in a world where the ruling class is continuing to silently kill us? How can we define self-defense when the threat we're fighting against isn't immediately obvious, but rather the entire system? Let's start by analyzing the system that allows this violence to continue and how it justifies itself. In 1919, Max Weber gave his lecture, Politics as a Vocation, wherein he argues that the modern state is defined by its claim to own the monopoly on the legitimate use of physical force. Quote, "Today, however, we have to say that the state is a human community that successfully claims the monopoly of the legitimate use of physical force within a given territory. Note that territory is one of the characteristics of the state. Specifically, at the present time, the right to use physical force is ascribed to other institutions or to individuals only to the extent to which the state permits it." What he means by this is that the only people who are legally allowed to physically harm others are agents of the government, such as the police and the military. I mean, at first the sentiment sounds pretty good. We don't just want anyone being able to hurt anyone else, right? Only people whose job it is to hurt people should be in charge of that. But is it correct to only allow one group of people to have a stranglehold on such a crucial right? When we're ruled by billionaires who want nothing more than to hurt the working class and earn more for themselves, why should we give them the right to be the only ones to have access to physical violence? We're allowing the people at the top to challenge us workers by any means necessary, going as far as allowing private militias to continue to protect their status. In saying this, I'm certainly not encouraging any kind of physical violence towards others. All I aim to do is kind of explore the nature of the power dynamics between the workers and the ruling class, and how physical violence is used against us in order to continue to keep us down. In 1932, massive layoffs hit a Ford factory in Dearborn, Michigan, soon after the Great Depression. The former workers did not have unemployment insurance or Social Security to fall back on, and welfare gave nearly nothing. These workers decided to organize a protest against the factory that had fired them to try and get their jobs back. A crowd of 3,000 to 5,000 people gathered to march, with banners that had slogans like, "Tax the rich and feed the poor," and "Give us work" written on them. They flew these banners as they peacefully proceeded through the streets from Detroit to Dearborn. Once they hit Dearborn, the police began firing tear gas into the crowd. Others would start hitting protesters with clubs, and one officer even began firing a gun. Fire trucks sprayed cold water into the crowd. The Ford security guards began shooting into the crowd. Even when these peaceful marchers began to retreat, the police and the private militia continued shooting, now with machine guns. When all was said and done, 5 protesters were killed and 22 were injured. A thankfully very small number compared to the atrocity that had been inflicted upon them. And this was a direct result of the idea of the monopoly of violence. The government authorized Ford to arm their security, as well as give them their own police protection. And the result was an assault on the workers that wanted nothing more than to not starve on the streets. And this is just one example. Wikipedia has an entire page dedicated to the deaths of workers killed in US labor disputes. The ruling class wants to continue this monopoly of violence so that we cannot defend ourselves when necessary, while morally justifying this position as the way things should be. The state is just used as another branch of control over us, and until we can do something about it, we're always going to be under the heel of the ruling class. When they want to exercise their power over us, we need to be able to legally defend ourselves. It's a right we all should have. And this isn't a controversial issue either. Everyone from the Republicans to the Black Panthers believe in the right to defend oneself from tyranny. The state continues to hold their monopoly of violence over our heads to keep the working class in check. One prominent way they do this is through the death penalty. The death penalty is still practiced in 54 countries around the world, which accounts for only 28% of all countries. The ones who used it most often were China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and America. Even within the US, there are only 22 states who still use it as a punishment. The death penalty is the ultimate claim to the monopoly on violence. It's one that's slowly being eroded around the world as the practice becomes more and more controversial. And on top of that, our justice system is incredibly biased in all kinds of ways. It is biased against minorities, against those people who are marginalized in society, and against the working class as a whole. Again, why is it that the wealthy never seem to get into any real trouble for the crimes that they commit? According to the Death Penalty Information Center, there have been at least 200 people since 1973 who have been wrongly sentenced to death. That's a little over 4% of all death penalty cases. To say that in another way, the government has been directly responsible for killing at least 200 completely innocent people since 1973. That statistic is more than enough for me to be against the death penalty. I just don't understand how you can be for any system that unnecessarily kills innocent people. And those 200 are just the ones that we know of. Why should we continue to allow the state to do this to innocent citizens? Imagine if you were the victim of this violence, being killed for a crime that you weren't guilty of. But again, the rich and elite would never find themselves in this circumstance. I mean, look at OJ. When you have money, it's possible to transcend the violence of the state. you're on another level of society. When the elites are so insulated from justice that they can do whatever they want without consequence, how can the rest of us function? And there are plenty of people on both sides of the issue of capital punishment in America. It's a very controversial topic. Yet, the killing of an insurance CEO was pretty popular, at least among the younger demographic. Around 60% of voters under 30 found the killer's actions at least acceptable. It serves as another point of agreement among us in the working class. The rich are never going to come to justice in the system that they continue to prop up and support, especially if they continue feigning innocence because there's no blood directly on their hands. We will always be less fortunate than them in the legal system, so why try and fight them there, some people think. When there's always people ruling over you that don't have your best interest in mind and actively trying to harm you, there's one thing you need to keep in mind: your right to self-defense. One legal definition of self-defense is as follows, quote, "Self-defense is the use of force to protect oneself from an attempted injury by another. If justified, self-defense is a defense in criminal and tort law. It is used in unlawful acts involving force, such as murder, assault, and battery. The danger must be imminent, meaning that they believe that they had to act when they did to avoid the danger. The act of self-defense must be proportionate to the danger, and the person defending themselves cannot be the initial aggressor, the first to threaten or use physical force." Analyzing this definition, we can see that self-defense is a matter of personal safety. Using force to protect your person is a right. While I don't like violence, and I don't think it should be called for, I think we need to analyze the role of self-defense in the face of violent threats. In the case of self-defense, it is necessary to stop the violence of your attacker through proportionate action. What happens when grocery CEOs raise food prices to the point of us not being able to eat, or water CEOs not allowing you to access water? The state would be failing to protect the interests and the well-being of their citizens. And when we are unable to live without causing change, a form of self-defense becomes the only option. When the populace is in immediate danger, such as the danger faced by neglect from the capitalist class, the principle of self-defense may suggest that the proportionate action to ensure survival is justified, according to Engels' concept of social murder. Karl Marx specifically affirms the right to keep the working class armed under communism. Quote, "Under no pretext should arms and ammunition be surrendered. Any attempt to disarm the workers must be frustrated, by force if necessary." Marx was no pacifist. He thought bloody revolution was inevitable, and that all workers should prepare themselves for it. He did not see the government's monopoly of power as legitimate, because that government isn't ruled by the people. We're ruled by the bourgeois, who, without the threat of violence, will never relinquish power. And to Marx, this is self-defense. To guarantee the rule of the few will not come back into fruition, a dictatorship of the proletariat must occur. The right to defending the working class is above all else. In America, our neoliberal system is set up to guarantee us three things: life, liberty, and property. But looking around, this just doesn't seem to be the case. Again, our very right to life is threatened every day by our lack of adequate healthcare. Liberty is unevenly distributed amongst the population, just on account on how one is born. And property rights fall across class lines, with the wealthiest among us being able to exercise these rights in a way that most of us can't, like having private militias, for example. And this isn't the only way we're scared into submission. Again, the death penalty is explicitly a scare tactic used by the government to keep the workers from doing anything too revolutionary. This power over life and death seems, to me, to be a quintessential part of the monopoly of violence. The profit motive of capitalism will inevitably induce this situation, and one must be ready when it happens. In contribution to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, Marx writes, quote, "The weapon of criticism cannot, of course, replace criticism by weapons. Material force must be overthrown by material force, but theory also becomes a material force as soon as it has gripped the masses." Marx is not against a revolt against the ruling class. His students, Mao and Lenin, weren't against the idea either, but I don't see this to be the ideal solution, and I think a peaceful revolution would be much better. However, it is important to keep in mind how others throughout history have justified their actions. Even Marx doesn't believe that violence is the optimal solution. Quote, The very cannibalism of the counter-revolution will convince the nations that there is only one way in which the murderous death agonies of the old society and the bloody birth throes of the new society can be shortened, simplified, and concentrated, and that way is revolutionary terror. He talks of revolutionary terror, scaring the people to believe that revolution is inevitable, to follow along because they see the writing on the wall. I think my solution is slightly different. Instead of terrorizing people with the thoughts of revolution, why not convince them that this revolution is the correct thing to do? In a world that's so interconnected, the best thing we could do for the revolution is continue to tell others about how great the world could be. It seems like healthcare could be a great start for the conversation these days, seeing as everyone hates our current system. Now I'd like to turn gears a little bit and talk about an example from recent history of this revolutionary terror being quite successful. And I'm talking about the Black Panther Party. During the Civil Rights Movement, there were two prominent leaders that discussed gaining rights in very different ways. Martin Luther King Jr., he was in favor of a nonviolent movement, while Malcolm X very much was not. In 1964, he gave a speech with the basic idea being as follows, quote, "If we don't do something real soon, I think you'll have to agree that we're going to be forced either to use the ballot or the bullet. It's one or the other in 1964. Much as Marx before him, Malcolm X understood the power of revolutionary terror. He delivered the speech 2 years before the founding of the Black Panther Party, but the sentiment was there. Inspired by the practices of Malcolm X, the Black Panther Party was founded in 1966. They were a Marxist-Leninist organization that preached the ideas of the class struggle. They also fought against police brutality and even offered free lunch and healthcare for their local communities. They were there to serve the people, to fight for what they cared for, and to liberate all of those that were oppressed by the power structures in place. In such a broken system, is this not self-defense? Ensuring the right for life to their communities was a necessity. Police brutality was rampant, and the government's monopoly on power was literally killing them. Quote, "When a mechanic wants to fix a broken down car engine, he must have the necessary tools to do the job. When the people move for liberation, they must have the basic tool of liberation, the gun. Only with the power of the gun can the black masses halt the terror and brutality perpetuated against them by the armed racist power structure. And in one sense, only by the power of the gun can the whole world be transformed into the earthly paradise dreamed of by the people from time immemorial." One successful practitioner of the art and science of national liberation and self-defense put it this way: "We are advocates of the abolition of war. We do not want war, but war can only be abolished through war, and in order to get rid of the gun, it is necessary to take up the gun." Given no other avenue of liberation, the Black Panthers began to arm themselves. And they never directly incited any violence, nor did they ever harm anyone for any reason other than self-defense. But just the mere threat that they posed was more than enough for the people in charge to be scared, just as Marx had said. And who knows how many countless lives the action of this party saved, just by acting on their right to self-defense. In fact, right before MLK was assassinated, he was even beginning to rethink his nonviolent principles after seeing the successes of these liberation groups. The threatening use of force was certainly a factor in the civil rights movement, and everyone could see it. All of their actions, looking out for welfare, life, and liberty of their constituents, made them prime suspects for the FBI. The Panthers posed a threat to the entrenched system. They made it clear that there was a way forward. A way that included them standing up for their rights and using them to defend themselves. They were able to accomplish so much good. Again, I don't want any of this to seem like a glorification of violence because it certainly isn't. In fact, the Black Panthers never supported violence. The image of firearms being touted by an underprivileged class was enough for the privileged class to label them as extremists. Many of the instances which the Black Panthers used violence were because of FBI provocateurs or police raids on the House of Members. So what does this teach us, and what can we do? Look, I'm certainly not advocating for anyone to go out and start shooting in the streets. Far from it. I'm not advocating for the assassination of other CEOs and members of the capitalist class. But I think it's important to exercise your Second Amendment rights. And I think it's very important to analyze your role in society. Think about how the things around you are impacting your quality of life, and how they came to be. Society is built to favor the wealthiest, so why should we continue to play by the rules they've made? If healthcare is something you think may be better in the hands of the government, or at least out of the hands of the companies, how else could society improve by spreading wealth out a little more and giving less power to corporations? People like the basic ideas of collectivism, but the words socialism or communism or Marxism scares them off. It's been drilled into our heads from a young age to fear the Red Menace, but we really weren't told anything about it, just that these ideas were dangerous. But especially as Gen Z, who is extremely favorable to socialism, grows up, I hope these ideas will continue to get less and less stigmatized. As much as the right wants to paint left-wing politics as inherently violent, this just isn't the case. They're always trying to do this. From the Black Panthers to the Little Black Book, there's no shortage of lies that they'll make up to oppress us and continue to call us violent. And the capitalists continue to profit from the lies that they create. Frankly, this is just an introduction to a topic that is so complex, it'll make your head spin. How many books have been written on the topics of violence and self-defense? I am barely scratching the surface here. And consider this a jumping off point to a much larger discussion over the issue of rights and self-defense. Philosophers like Foucault spent an entire career analyzing these things, and there are people way smarter than me that you should be reading if you're interested in the topic. I'll leave a pinned comment below with some books that I plan on doing some further reading with. In the broken system that we live in, where it permits some members of society to starve on the streets while others can buy up as many houses and apartments they please without remorse, what is self-defense? These conditions that we live under aren't normal. Under normal conditions, nobody would be cheering for a murderer. But we don't live in normal conditions, and our generation really sees this. My only hope is that we can do something about the problems we'll be facing in the coming years before it becomes too late. And I hope that we can begin to stand up to the people in charge and demand change. So if you're still listening, thank you for watching this video. And if you liked it, go ahead and leave it a like. And if you want to continue the discussion, go ahead and leave a comment. And if you want to see more videos like this, hit the subscribe button. And thank you, have a great day.